Hello, everyone, and my name is Professor Kelly, and I'm going to be your instructor for Introduction to Pharmacy. And we are going to start this off with Section 101 lecture on the history of pharmacy. But before we begin, let's reflect a little bit on what pharmacy or medicine is really like. I posted on Module 1 a video called The Last 200 Years of Medicine or 200 Years of Medicine, and it's a documentary on how medicine has evolved over the last 200 years. Now, it's not required that you watch this video, but I highly recommend it. It's very interesting. It takes you through infectious disease, surgery, anesthesia, how medicine has changed, not only pharmaceutical medicine, but also the practice of medicine. And when we look at healthcare, it's not just doctor to patient. There's lots of different individuals that are involved in healthcare to make it good healthcare for all patients. And they collaborate with a healthcare team, and these individuals that are on these teams would include physicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, dentists, dentist hygiene, nurses, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, all the way down to ancillary staff. When you look at a hospital setting, radiologists, medical laboratory technicians, um, respiratory therapy, they're all part of a healthcare team. But this course is going to focus on pharmacy. And in the United States today, pharmacists and pharmacy technicians work in to fill about 4.5 billion prescriptions each year. And often the pharmacy technician is really the backbone of getting this work done. So becoming a pharmacy technician is very important, and this course is going to give you a lot of different information about the duties of a pharmacy technician and expectations, how to maintain a certification, things like that. But to start, let's do a little bit of history of pharmacy. So to begin, let's look at the ancient origins of pharmacy. And really, when you look back at pharmacy, it goes all the way back to the Mesopotamian times where archaeologists were digging up, in areas in old Mesopotamian area, which it would be considered Iran and Iraq area probably today as we would know it. And they found tablets that had pharmaceutical medicinal preparations on them. So really pharmacy can go way back. A lot of these were herbal remedies and ritual magics and things like that. But as time went on, ancient Egyptians compiled lists of drugs, and these lists of drugs are really probably more herbal remedies, um, was known as a formulary. Today we call them formularies, but the pharmacopoeias or dispensaries. The very first or the most famous was Ebert's Papyrus, back way in the time. Today, when we look at a list of drug names, we call them drug formularies. It's a list of all the drugs that are available, and often drug formularies, when you look at them in clinical pharmacy or commercial pharmacy, they are the drugs that are listed that your insurance will cover. The insurance companies will actually pay for. So you may hear this term formulary, and you may also hear it as, is it on formulary? And what they're saying, does the insurance company actually pay for that drug? Is it on formulary and the insurance company is going to cover that medication? Because if it's not on formulary, then there might be another medication that does the same thing that is on formulary and the insurance company will pay for it. And you'll learn about that in community pharmacy as you work through this program. Um, as we continue, some other people did believe that a lot of pharmacy back in ancient times were evil spirits that were causing this disease, that these people were possessed, and that's what was causing their illness. So there was a lot of different ways they would try and rid these people of these spirits, and tribal shamans would often do this, and they would get rid of the spirits, and that's how they were healed. Now, it just happened to be that it worked. It just was a trial and error, and it just happened to be that it worked and they got better, and they thought that these evil spirits were leaving their body, which was probably not true. Um, Many of the treatments that they did do back in ancient times were really trial and error, and they were often um, caused death. If they didn't, they were lucky. Some of the prevalent treatments were garlic for inflammation, liverwort plants for liver problems. I don't know if it's because that's why they call it a liverwort plant. Wine and pepper for stomach ailments. I know today I've heard of lemon can help with stomach. Onions for parasitic worms, and then tiger fat for joint pain. Now, when we look at herbal remedies that they say actually have value, these are some of them. They say walnuts for the brain, and they say multiple mixtures of plants and roots and other concoctions can help different diseases. But I like this image because I know we all have probably heard, I don't know if you guys, but in the day we would like, oh, if you eat lots of carrots, it's good for your eyes. And if you look at a carrot and you slice it like that, it looks like an eyeball. So I think a lot of them have correlated these foods with the body parts and the way they look, but I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. So just something I thought was kind of fun to share. So um, really, as we look at most of the history, it really starts with a Greek physician called Hippocrates, which was also known as the father, or Hippocrates is probably yet another way you would pronounce that. Hippocrates was the father of medicine, and the reason he did that is he shifted the belief of these ancient spiritual possessions into more scientific approach. And he believed illness was a physical explanation, not spiritual. And he related them around the harmony of the four body fluids, and they were called humors, the four humors. And if you look here on the PowerPoint, he believed that the balance of these four elements kept the balance in life and in your body. So the blood was equal to air, phlegm was equal to water, yellow bile was fire, and black bile was earth. And if you balanced these, if they were normal, you were in balance. But if one of these were off, you were unbalanced. So think about some of these things like blood. If it changes color, it turns black, you do have a disease. If you think about phlegm, you're thinking about mucus, which is developing in the lungs. And if you have green phlegm, you have sickness. The yellow bile and the black bile, he related them to fire and earth, but they're probably more related to urine and stool if we really look at it. And he probably was right. He is right, because a lot of those four elements we actually test and study when we're looking for disease in humans today. So he was he published more than 70 medical texts that categorized disease and signs and symptoms and treatment. And that's why he was given the name the father of medicine. Um, a lot of his treatment to rebalance these four elements were things such as bloodletting, which was a phlebotomy, or releasing blood, because if their blood was bad, let's get rid of it and it'll make them better. Laxative, which would relate to the black bile. If their fecal matter or their stool was abnormal, get it out of them. So laxative, let's make them basically, for lack of a better word, poop it out. And then rest, diet, style changes, light foods. And we heard that from our grandmothers, like, you got to rest, drink lots of fluids to make us better. So he was on to something. His stuff was not completely crazy. He did have value in what he believed. I put this slide on here because it's some unusual medical techniques and some images that are kind of scary. But bloodletting was very common in ancient times to get rid of this bad blood out of the system. And typhonation, which is an actual old form of relieving evil spirits, which is a very gruesome surgery where they basically drilled holes into the skull, which was believed to release these bad spirits out of the brain. And then they also used mercury, which was one of the first medication elixirs, which we know today mercury is very poisonous, so probably not such a good thing. They also use sulfur and arsenic, which are both toxic poisons as well. So they may have worked, but they probably killed the person as well. So um, so I put this slide on here too because some of these remedies are not completely non-existent today. We do have a disease called hemochromatosis, which is the overproduction of red blood cells. And when you have that disease, they do therapeutic phlebotomy. Leaching could be an option. They do also use, like if you have a gangrenous foot, this is an image here, like a really somebody who's a diabetic and has a gangrenous foot, they can put maggots on that foot and it will eat the bacteria up so it can heal better. And it also pulls blood, and they put leeches on there because it pulls blood to the source of the infection. And what is carrying treatment for that infection? Blood, because most gangrenous bacteria don't want oxygen and they die in the presence of oxygen. So if you get the blood there, the oxygen will kill the bacteria. So by the leeches sucking the blood to that area, it actually heals the foot, and then the maggots can actually eat the bacteria. So just some remedies that have been here for many, many years have still are present. So early pharmacy, we do have Galen, who was a Greek physician who pioneered the practice of dissecting animals. And he would dissect the animals and study their organs and their anatomy. He really coined compounding. Compounding is mixing of medications together to make something. So he recognized that some of the ingredients in compounding our medications were considered active ingredients. And if you ever go to a pharmacy and you pick up a over-the-counter pharmacy medication in the pharmacy area and you look at the back, or go to your medicine cabinet, look at the back of it, you're going to see inactive and active ingredient. The active ingredient is what's actually making you feel better. For example, Advil, the active ingredient is going to be the ibuprofen. So looking at, he figured out that there were active ingredients and he would mix them into a compound, which a lot of times we call a vehicle or a way to get the medicine into the body. And these vehicles were made into juices and saps and oils. And so he was really the very first person to ever compound. So very interesting science, very early days. Eastern and Western medicine. Eastern medicine had a very interesting way of looking at medicine. They very much focused on the use of plants, and I believe they still do this today. So a Hindu surgeon called Shushuda, I believe is how you pronounce it, he was discusses medicine use from plants. And then Indian traditional medicine, Ayurvedic, is a holistic approach for medication that included patients' spiritual being. So these are some very old studies, but I'm not saying that they're not still practiced today. Western medicine, as we became more westernized, we are more dependent on observation theory and scientific experimentation. So we went away from a lot of that spiritual, ritual, religious belief and are more scientific in Western medicine, which Hippocrates was as well. So taking a look at some of that early medicine in the Middle Ages, we started to focus more on ethics, and they started in the Middle Ages, they started making hospitals. One of the first hospitals was actually in Cairo, Egypt, and it was a building there to care for the sick. They didn't name it a hospital, but it was the first, and they actually treated both wealthy and poor, which was very unusual back then. Usually the wealthy were the only ones that got any type of treatment. So then in the 11th and 12th centuries, physicians were often used as the pharmacists and chemists. So they were the ones that were mixing and creating medications for people, but really only the wealthy could afford them. So none of the poor could go to a physician. So what they did is they would have shops, and they became apothecary stores is what they called them. And in the back was a room that resembled a chemistry lab, and the people that were not as wealthy, the common folk, would go back there and buy medication from uneducated non-physicians at a price they could afford. Usually there are mixtures of herbal remedies, tinctures, and saps. Also, a lot of times the apothecary store, they couldn't label it as being present there. So they would use the old barber shop, was the barber shop that you see outside the little red and blue twirl. They had those outside their store so people knew they had an apothecary store in the back of the store. And often that represented the red and the blue was they did bloodletting. So the barber shop coined that from our day, but that was actually an old medicinal medicine symbol. The symbols we look at today for medicine are what we call the caduceus, which is the um, medicine with the two little wings and the snake that wraps around, and the snake represents renewal of youth, and that's why it's on there. Um, but this came from, I think you pronounce it Asclepius, which is a Greek god for healing, and it was the symbol for medicine, and that's where the American Medical Association coined that symbol. Just some interesting facts. Um, but in these apothecary stores, most of them were apprentice. It was really the early pharmacy technicians, and they would get trained. It was like a trade guild. And when I say a trade guild, it was people that were trained on the job. So people would want to learn how to do this, and they would do an apprenticeship underneath a chemist and apothecary store, and they would learn how to make these compounds, and they were really the earliest form of pharmacy technicians. And for centuries, the English apothecaries, which if you go over to England today, and I went to Scotland not long ago, you would see all these old drugstores that said apothecary outside of them instead of drugstore or pharmacy. The English apothecaries belong to the Grocer Guild, which is the trade of the guild. And I find that kind of interesting because today a lot of our pharmacists are located in grocery stores. So just some interesting stuff about pharmacy and kind of where it came from. So as we move on in early pharmacy, now we're getting over into American pharmacy, and William Proctor was the father of American pharmacy, and he was instrumental in finding the American Pharmaceutical Association in 1852, and that was when in 1852 the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Convention, the USP, was kind of developed. And they were an independent organization that kind of set standards for over-the-counter medications, homeopathic medications, dietary supplements. Um, the U.S. Pharmacopoeia originally he was involved in making this in 1812, where it managed all the favorite formularies. So what was basically happening is all these formulas and all these recipes were coming out, and it was hard to manage. So they tried to 11 different physicians came together and tried to collect all those formulas and recipes and put them together into one medicinal product or compounding product book for people to access. Now today we call it the USP, which is basically the pharmacopoeia of 1820, and has taken over that. And then finally, the last thing I just wanted to share was that even today, a lot of these medicinal drugs that are, herbal remedies are used even today. So, opium, comes from a flower of a poppy. It's one of the most potent analgesics. Analgesic means to prevent pain or pain stopping, so it's used for pain medication. And opiums are the narcotics that we know today, like morphine would be an opioid-based medication. I'm sure all of you have heard or probably taking penicillin unless you're allergic to it. Penicillin came from Penicillium notatum, which was a fungus discovered by Alexander Fleming back in, what was it, 1920s, I believe, late 1918 to 1920. And it's an antibiotic. So a lot of our medications come from something natural, but we actually have changed it to be more synthetic over time. So we make them more in a lab today. So this is section 101. You can read more about this in your textbook, or you can listen to the videos that read them to you. It's really your choice, and I will see you in the next video on section 101.2. Thanks.